Well, let's.
You want to send that one, and then I'll do it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, welcome to the House Progressive Caucus for week 3 of the 2025 legislative session. This week's theme will be public education, and we have Colin Robinson from the National Educators Association of Vermont, Stephanie Yu from Public Assets Institute, and Jay Nichols from the Vermont Principals Association with us today. Our agenda for today is just announcements, housekeeping announcements from the leadership team meeting today. Then we'll do a round of introductions, and then we'll jump into the conversation with NEA and Public Assets Institute, doing a bit of a presentation. Vermont Principals Association has some talking points that I would like to share with folks, and then we'll have general discussion. And I guess grab a chair anywhere. In the future, we're gonna make sure that there's a set of folding chairs. We have room for guests. But okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and do the housekeeping stuff for the day. The schedule of the week. There will be discrimination prevention and DEI trainings throughout today and tomorrow. You'll participate with your committee. So it'll be smaller groups with just 2 or 3 committees at a time doing the training together. Because committees will have quorum, the trainings will need to be live streamed. But the hope is that this will still be a better environment for people asking questions in a smaller group. Wednesday, we have a caucus of the whole after the House floor, where we'll hear the governor's proposal on education and property taxes. So timely discussion for us today. Thursday, after the floor, there will be another caucus of the whole with ethics, rules, and decorum training. And if you could think about whether, or if there are any topics that you would like covered in the training, please let me know. Anything on ethics, rules, or decorum, and I'll pass that information back to the speaker, and they'll make sure that the topic is covered during the training.
Can I just throw something out there? If maybe the speaker could do a reminder of our gender neutral business professional attire dress code to just prevent some harassment that might happen.
Yes.
Which has happened.
already happened.
Yeah, it's happened to me in the past, like.
Well, it's already happened by email.
Oh, I guess I know what you're talking about, yeah, it did. And in light of recent federal events too, with that executive order saying that there's only men and women and stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. And yeah, just putting a bug in your ear, please just let me know if other things come to mind for you, and I'll pass that along. That is noted, and we'll get back to the speaker. So other committee meetings this week, there will be a joint rules committee to set the crossover date. And if the proposal is accepted, then our policy committees have to complete their work by March 4th. And then our money committees need to complete their work by March 21st. There will also be a House Rules Committee. They will review and approve a proposal on committee voting that was similar to the way that we were governed last session. So if this policy is passed by the Rules Committee, then members would be allowed to vote remotely for up to 3 full legislative days in their committees. But their remote participation won't count towards quorum. So keep that in mind. So that'll happen this week. Another request that Legislative Council staff capacity regarding education and property tax policy is really stressed at the moment. So if you are planning to submit bills, planning to submit bills regarding education or tax policy, please submit those as short form bills. And then finally, committee rooms are going to be moving. Government operations and education will move to the mezzanine. The plan is for the second weekend in February. And then energy and digital infrastructure will move next week from room 41 to downstairs to the room next to judiciary. So that'll become another meeting space for us. Okay, those are all the leadership team announcements. Any questions on that before we jump in to the caucus conversation? Okay, all right, so first we'll introduce ourselves to each other and to the audience. I'm Representative Kate Logan. I represent Chittenden 16 in Burlington. That's the old North End in downtown Burlington. I am this year's leader of the House Progressive Caucus.
My name is Chloe Tomlinson. I'm representing Renew Speech in mid 21, and serving on the House Directors Committee.
Hi, I'm Jay Nichols. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Principal Association. I live in Berkshire, Vermont, on the Canadian border. My office is here in Montclair.
Josh Ronsky, I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Progressive Party, live in Burlington, and I'm down here to support the caucus most Tuesdays.
Brian Sheena, representative from Burlington, Chittenden 15.
Stephanie Yu from Public Access Institute, and I'm in Burlington.
Good to see folks. I'm Colin Robinson. I'm the political director for the Vermont MEA union that represents public school teachers and schools staff. Great to be here.
I'm Kate McCann. I represent Washington 4, which is small.
Great, thanks so much. Steph and Colin, if you'd like to go ahead, I believe you have a slideshow that you could run through with us, and then Jay, I know you have some talking points, and then I'm sure that we are going to have a number of questions for you, if that's okay. So just end the rest of the conversation with Q&A.
Great. Well, I'll start and then pass it over to Steph pretty quickly because she's the brains of this and her colleagues there. But so Vermont EA, and we've been working with public assets on education funding issues for over 2 decades at this point. And one of the things that we know about our public education funding system are a couple of things. On the spending side, we have strong, robust public oversight. It's the most scrutinized spending that we do as a state when you actually think about it. It's centered in meeting the needs of kids because those decisions are made locally, reflected upon by teachers, administrators, and school boards. And when you actually look at education spending as a percentage of state GDP, it's actually been steady, right? What we also know, and we've done polling on this at Vermont EA this past fall, is Vermonters have long been confused and frustrated by how we raise the taxes to fund our public education system. However, they're strongly supportive of public education. So what we experience is this dual sense of frustration and support. They support public education, they're frustrated with how we pay for it. And we also recognize here we are 25 plus years into our current education funding system, and there's been added layers and layers of complexity, and folks just really don't understand what's going on. So that's sort of the baseline of how we oriented our conversation. And as I mentioned, this was borne out in a poll that we did. 7 in 10 Vermonters think education is one of the most important things that, and actually the most important thing that their tax dollars go to. And 7 in 10 Vermonters think our property taxes are too high. So our conclusion is, as I said earlier, Vermonters are frustrated with how we pay for our schools. So with that charge, we worked with public assets on a proposal that I'll let Steph go into in a minute that goes to the crux of recognizing that our schools are doing more to meet the needs of our students than ever before. There's been a silent shift from the general fund to the education fund, meaning from income tax to property tax over the past 10 years as schools have picked up the social service needs of students and families so they're able to access their learning. And it's in that context that schools are facing the pressures that they are, the educators facing the pressures that they are, the property taxes are facing the pressures they are, and most importantly, students are working their best to try and get the education they deserve and access their learning. So it was in that context that we set about to say, okay, how can we provide immediate middle-class property tax relief to over 50,000 Vermonters? How can we make sure the right things are in our education fund? You know, are there things that historically haven't been in our education fund and now are and have been shifted from the general fund income tax to the progressive property tax? And if we have an education funding system that 2/3 of Vermonters in some way pay based upon their income, what isn't working here? How can we make sure that this is directly responsive to the actual income that Vermonters have? What we found in the polling is that 7 in 10 Vermonters support eliminating the residential property tax and moving to an income-based system. We also found that 8 in 10 Vermonters support taxing second homes. These are politically popular. Not only are they the right things to do, not only they materially help working class and middle class folks, but they also ensure that our school continue to be robustly funded in a way that meets the needs of our students. One thing that we say is I would challenge any person to walk into a school building and identify adults that are working with kids who shouldn't be there, who are redundant, who are somehow excessive. I don't think it's possible. Our schools have adults in their buildings working with kids and students every single day to meet their needs. What Vermonters are frustrated with is how we raise the funds. Middle class Vermonters can't handle and can't afford our property tax rate. We need to fix that immediately and pass it over to Steph to go through those details.
Can you just remind me, though, when did you do that poll experience, right?
It was, yes, thank you, Steph. We did it it was mid-October. So it's sort of at the peak of the fall's conversations around all issues impacting, public policy conversations happening at that moment.
I share my screen today. So yeah, I just want to go through a quick version, and I don't know how much time we'll have or have for this conversation, but I did want to kind of present the plan really quick, but I'm not necessarily spending a lot of time on the background of the education funding system. So if there are questions or if you want more of that at some other time, let me know. But I'll just kind of go with a quick outline of the plan and we'll go from there. And then, so I'm ready to go to share. There we go. So to Colin's point, I think it's true that Vermonters support public schools and their own property tax relief. Those things are both true. We don't want cuts or schools consolidation forced on communities. And in fact, I think the critical thing here is that cuts won't actually change the unfairness that's been eroding our funding system. Unless we change how we pay for schools, low and middle income Vermonters will continue to subsidize high income taxpayers, right? And the problem is really the property tax piece of the education funding system, right? It's a hybrid system. It's somewhat based on income, somewhat based on property value, which makes it more complicated, but it's the property piece that is causing all the problems, right? That's what causes tax bills to spike. And it accounts for most of the disconnect between like what voters think is happening with their school budgets and school spending and what shows up on their tax bill, right? So that disconnect is driven primarily by the property tax piece of the system. So our proposal is really about providing immediate and permanent property tax relief by essentially restoring and strengthening income sensitivity, which most Vermonters benefit from, and then ultimately moving to an income-based tax system. And I do want to know, as Colin said, so this has been in place since the Brigham decision in the mid-90s, and the foundation system we had before that resulted in these really stark disparities between rich towns and poor towns, essentially, which most states still experience, right? The foundation amount essentially ends up being a ceiling for poor towns and a floor for rich towns. And so from our perspective, the answer to that disconnect between voters' choices and the tax rates isn't to take away the choice, it's to strengthen the connection. So there's no magic number of what we should spend on schools. And to Colin's point, I'm a parent, I have kids in the Burlington School District, and it's tough to see the fat, right? But I think that the way we figure out what's the right amount to spend on schools is to have this kind of ongoing conversation about the changing needs of kids and then evolving what we spend to meet those needs. So really quickly, the 3-part plan is
to start with. To start with, providing immediate tax relief to middle class Vermont. So again, just to kind of, a little background, resident homeowners can pay their school taxes either by property value or by income, but a lot of people end up paying both. For most Vermonters, paying by income is a fairer way because it's better based on their ability to pay. But we have these thresholds built into the system that require some low and moderate income homeowners to pay both the school income tax share and the property value based share. And the property value based share is the part that's causing all the problems, causing these spikes in tax bills, as well as resulting in a lot of middle class families paying the most in school taxes, right? So these thresholds are creating these, what we're calling these tax cliffs, where an extra dollar of income or a property reappraisal or a property adjustment, valuation adjustment, has disproportionate tax consequences. And those thresholds haven't been raised in years, right? That $47,000 threshold that we refer to as circuit breaker. Nobody remembers, but it was well before when that number was put in place. It hasn't changed since. The 90,000 hasn't changed since 2008. And the property value pieces, the 400,000 and the 225 were actually lowered in 2018 to impose more school taxes on middle and moderate income Vermonters, right? So those are the thresholds. You can kind of see how those can create these cliffs.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Of course.
Or two quick questions. No, I'm not gonna remember it. One was, do you know off the top of your head what 400% of the federal poverty line is? Because I feel like it's close to 47,000, which is just, it's showing how much we're taxing people who are already struggling. And then, the other question was, when was the Brigham decision? What year was that? 97. Okay, just to put it in context.
Yeah, 1997. And the answer to the question is it depends on the family size, but part of what we're thinking about is for a family of four, it's right around 150, somewhere in that 400%, right? So I think that's part of what we've been looking at. I want to say it's 30,000 the poverty level for a family of four. So 400% of that would be 120, 130. Again, my years might be slightly off, but that's the ballpark of what we're talking about. But just to demonstrate what the cliffs do, and you don't need to memorize all the numbers. The point is, you go from 47,000 to 47,100 and your tax bill jumps a bit. You go from 999 to 90,000, your tax bill jumps a bit. And it depends on the property value of your house too. So you can see, and this happens no matter what's going on with your school budgets, right? So your school budgets could stay flat and you cross those thresholds and you get hit with this big problem. So that's the piece that we're really focused on. You can see these huge increases. And you can see, we're looking at the median house price in Vermont, right, is now for $340,000. So this is not, this is a pretty average family, right? And I think what's important to note is how fast, and this was true back when all of this came up during the Brigham decision, was that how fast your property value is growing is not going to affect your ability to pay more taxes. And that's been definitely true in the last few years because we've seen these big property value increases sort of in the last couple of years since the pandemic. Vermont's had the fastest growing property values, and that doesn't mean our incomes are keeping up with those, right? So we're really what we want to do is target any relief for filling in these cliffs, because those are the taxpayers who are paying the biggest share of their income in school taxes, the middle class, moderate and middle class Vermonters. So the goal is really to update those thresholds, kind of bring them into present day. So here's the proposal. So you take that 47,000 to 60,000, that's the circuit breaker idea. The circuit breaker, again, that number's been in place for a really long time. Is now how it works is you're capped at 2% under 47. You add another step to that. So at 60%, you're capped at 2.5%, or your town tax rate, which I know is slower just for background, the FY25 income rate is better from 2% to 3.3%. Right? So it just softens the step. And then we move that 90,000 up to 130,000, which is essentially bringing it up to current inflation since 2008. And then we take that 400,000 property value, make it $1 million, so that you're only paying a property value piece over $1 million in property value if you're under 130,000. And then we take that 225 and bring that to the 400, so you would be paying a property value piece potentially over 130,000. And these next slides, you don't need to look closely at the numbers. What you need to look at are the colors, right? We'll share these so that you can kind of use them. Yeah, and be in touch with you.
I'll be listening. Yeah, thank you.
What we did do, we created these matrices so you can see what what is currently happening, so this is percent share of your income that you're paying in taxes. So right now, just think about the yellow is income sensitivity, the green is people who benefit from the circuit breaker, and then the blue are when you fall off the cliffs. Okay, so that's sort of that's the current system. And our proposal essentially does this, right? It expands the circuit breaker, it expands income sensitivity, and it minimizes the cliffs. So really, you only hit that cliff when your property is $1 million. And just for the record, there are very few people with incomes in the 30,000 range and homes of $1 million, right? Like, there's not that many people in that, but if that were to come up, people are concerned about high value property, you know, you still do pick up that property piece. And again, these matrices, both by percent of income and total dollar amount, are on our website. If you want to look yourself up or look your neighbors up or your constituents or anything like that, what the before and after might look like, we can do that. Second step of the plan is what Colin was talking about. I think
Just that first step, that would impact nearly 50,000 Vermonters. So you could do that, the legislature could pass this,
households.
50,000 households. You could pass this year effective July 1 and provide immediate property tax relief to 50,000 households. And we're not talking, when you look at the chart in detail, you'll realize that for some people, you're talking about cutting their taxes in half, right? And of course, this would cost money because the way our education tax expenditures work in the ed fund. But it's a sum that could be figured out, we believe, by actually potentially moving the cost of the teacher's normal cost out of the education fund into the general fund like it existed for 70 years, right?
Our
But
best estimates are like $50 to $60 million of what this would cost. And I think there's talk by
oh, yes.
There's been a lot of talk of buying down the rate. That happens in a lot of years, whether the rate's being bought down, whether it's reserves or whether it's one-time money or some other version. And our point is target that relief for the people who are paying the most, because those people that are in those cliffs are paying 7, 8, 9% of their income compared to the 2 to 3 to 4% that everybody else is paying, right? So we're saying these are the people hit the hardest, target the relief toward them, and it happens whether or not school budgets go up, right? It's about your income and your property value intersections.
Colin, I have a question for you about moving the teachers normal cost out of the ed fund. Is there any concern, just having been part of the pension conversation a few years back, that might lead to underfunding the teacher pension or any type of challenge with the teacher pension and not having it preserved in the ed fund? And is there anything we can do to prevent that?
I mean, the reality is, so the normal cost for the teacher's pension was in the ed fund. It was in the general fund for 7 years, from 1947 to 2018. The reality is you start messing with the amount, not paying the full ADEC, and you start messing with the state bond rating. And last time I checked, I don't think the legislature is desirous of being in the practice of messing with the state's bond rating and increasing borrowing costs for other important projects. And so I think the work that was done by Representative McCann and other members of the task force, you and your colleagues in the legislature at that point as well, we're at a point in time where there's a clear recognition that the work that was done was important, that's been highly impactful, that we need to stay the course, and whether those dollars come from the general fund or the ed fund, I don't think it can be here to be impactful on maintaining a strong bond rating for the state.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I know there's a history of underfunding the teacher pension particularly, and I don't want to see us put ourselves in a position where down the road that happens again.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if it felt more protective in the ed fund or the general fund or.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one can understand the logic about why I moved to the ed fund. And to the point that I think Steph's going to go to next year is there are things that have been moved into the education fund that have been significant and impactful on property tax increases. You know, the cost of the normal pension cost that used to be borne primarily by the income tax in the general fund. That was changed and moved to the property tax, right? So.
Yeah, I think to that point, right, part of we always talk about the school taxes, so both the residential and non-residential pieces act as shock absorbers. Because if things get moved into the fund, then that's what expands to pick it up. And as long as we have these sort of unfair cliffs and pieces in that, you're still hurting some people more than others. Whenever those costs go up, it's not sort of evenly spread around, right? It's hitting some people harder than others. So that's the challenge, but But, so I think Colin sort of covered step two largely, in terms of what we're thinking about as rebalancing the ed fund, assessing what expenditures belong, don't belong, what the revenue mix looks like. And then what should be counted as education spending, which is what goes to your town tax rate versus what is sort of above the line cost and taken off the top and not impacting the tax rate. But I will just say, to Colin's point, right, one of the things worth noting is that the share of the ed fund that's picked up by the residential and non-residential piece has grown. It used to be around 60%, now it's more like 64, at various years it's been 67, 65. And that's $100 million more on the school tax piece, right, than coming from some general fund, other fund sources. And it, it's kind of gone up and down over the years, but the point is it's sort of trended in the direction of putting more, letting the school tax piece, the residential and non-residential, absorb the shock of any increases, right? That's how it sort of operates now. So to just move on to the third piece quickly, I think maybe a lot of you have some familiarity with what we've been talking about in terms of income-based taxes, so I don't want to spend too long, but just acknowledge that we've been doing this for 50 years. We've been making adjustments to school taxes based on income since 1970. For seniors, we expanded it to low income, 1997. Act 60 expanded it to everybody. So that was what income sensitivity did. And it captured a whole lot of people in 1997. And that's part of what we're trying to get to here is the share of people that benefit from it or that are still paying this property tax piece has grown over time because those thresholds haven't changed. So, but we've been doing it for a long time. And in fact, there was a plan in the 90s to go to income-based taxes totally. But instead we ended up with this very complicated hybrid system, which we then, as Colin said, amended over time to make it sort of more and more complicated and create a bigger and bigger disconnect between what we're doing and what's happening to the tax rates. And I think it's also, we talked about subsidizing the highest income Vermonters, and I think this really gets to this, that once you get out beyond income sensitivity, so you see the middle class is paying the most, and then once you get beyond income sensitivity, you see this pretty sharp fall off and ends up being aggressive on the top end, meaning that the highest income Vermonters are paying the smallest share of their income in school taxes. So moving to income based would eliminate all of that confusion from the common level appraisal, from the property tax piece, and really strengthen that connection and make it much clearer to voters what would happen if their taxes they vote on town meeting day. So challenges that are fixable, right? The cliffs are fixable, even though it does result in middle class Vermonters paying the most and having big jumps from one year to the next, no matter what's happening in school budgets, give these breaks to high income Vermonters. And we also see certain costs affecting certain districts more than others. I do want to just take a minute, if we have a couple more minutes, to talk about the things that are good about the system, to talk about whether they're sort of fiscally a system that we want to acknowledge and So there's a number of things that I want to just kind of acknowledge. Those are the challenges that are listed. But here's what we do well, right? We strike this balance between local, state, and urban control. All kids have access to this same statewide pot, which is what the burning fight is about. But we also have this community engagement at the local level because local school board and local voters are deciding on the budgets. The state also has this ability to smooth some of these cost differences across districts, which we do through things like categorical and deciding what's involved in that. We also have less disparity from town to town than adults are in 1997 and in many other states still have because they use a foundation system. So where a child lives matters much less in Vermont in terms of the quality of their education and spending on education than in other states. And I think it's also important to acknowledge we're working on an update of this chart for FY23 and FY25. Just because there's so many changes in FY25 is difficult. But the principle holds, which is that 2/3 of pupils fall in a pretty narrow band of spending. So for 23, it's about $1,600 on either side of the mean, right? This was a little, I can't remember what these numbers were, but the spread is about $3,000, that 2/3 of people fall in that range. And then you got a handful of high and low spenders on either side. And I think it's really important to know that those high and low spenders are not consistent town districts, right? What happens is you tend to be a high spender for a year and then you fall back closer to the mean. Something happens that drives your spending up for a year. And we had looked at that a few years ago and that was true. That's been true as long as we've been looking at it. But it's also true on the low spending side, which I don't think we fully appreciate. We know there's always, some town that we know sort of have, or it's just gonna be lower spending. But the lowest spenders don't tend to be the lowest spenders on a regular basis. They tend to be down there for a year and then they pop up back closer to the mean. So that really is a churn number. It's not as much of the sort of fixed people that you think it would be all the time, but it's really a churning piece. So I think that's helping, important to know. And again, that foundation system there was much wider disparity before Brigham, because we had this factor. And I think it's also worth saying that states that spend less than us per pupil often do so by underfunding poorer districts and by underpaying teachers. So our system increased equity. What we did was we brought the poorer towns up to a more reasonable spending level. That's what we achieved with Act 60 and 68. So I think that's something to celebrate and not look at rolling back. Another thing that we do well is that taxpayers in all towns pay the same rates for the same per pupil spending. Again, it sounds simple, wasn't true before Brigham. Before Brigham, you could have a really low tax rate and lots of money to spend per pupil, right? So if you look at the tax rate on the x-axis and the per pupil spending on the left, you could have a lower tax rate, lots of money to spend if you had a lot of property wealth in your town, or you can tax yourselves a lot and still not have much money to spend if you didn't have a lot of property wealth in your town. And what Act 60 and 68 accomplished was this. It created a coherent relationship between tax rates and spending. Towns that make the same effort, have the same tax rates, get the same education payments from that fund. That's sort of the big breakthrough of what happened in Act 60 and 61. So, and then another thing that we do well and we want to hold on to is that most people pay taxes based on the best measure we have of their ability to pay, which is income. So while we're talking about sort of the ways in which that insensitivity has eroded over time, it's still a really important part, because before that, low-income taxpayers were paying 10, 12, 15% of their income taxes, as opposed to the 2 to 3 to 3.5% that they're paying now. So, right, so 5 times as much in school taxes before this is done. So again, Vermonters want good schools, fair taxes, we can have both by basing taxes on income, and cuts to school spending won't change the fact that middle income Vermonters are paying the most in subsidized and high income Vermonters. So the last thing I want to just show you is, I think on this point, but we have a chart for it, as we do, which is to show that education fund expenditures have grown at about the same rates, adjusted for inflation, as the rest of the state budget, just about 1% a year. So worth knowing, again, lots of things that we can fix right now that do need work and need to be fixed. We just want to acknowledge that means the legislation does well, so, and, come back to the purpose of the agreement, which is to make sure that all kids have access to your best education still. No.
Thanks. And we're just gonna let Jay go ahead and share your talking points.
Sure.
And then,
I have some talking points that were federal related as well, but I'll probably skip those.
oh,
I
yeah,
didn't get the email, so I didn't know what even the conversation was about, but I do have a few things around Vermont Youth Education Fund. That's probably germane, so I'll stick to that.
thank you.
I'm not gonna comment on income tax versus property tax, but I've done a lot of research on that. I will say that our members, for the most part, and our executive board, has said that we think that towns that have a tax rate that is higher than the non-tax rate, non-resident tax rate for business, that they should at least go up that level. So if I live in the town of any town and my tax rate's $1.50, then the businesses in that town should be paying at least $1.50. And people with a second home should be paying at least $1.50. Whereas right now, there are some towns where I could be in a situation where I'm a second homeowner, I'm actually paying less property tax than a home. We think that should be fixed. We think that's a pretty easy fix, and we thought that the last couple of years. Other than that, things that these folks said, I think that's the main point I want to make there. In terms of my own notes, a few things that are coming out of the education fund that concern us. One example is pre-K that is not in school, that doesn't have licensed teachers and have a lack of oversight. So right now in Vermont, if you set up a pre-K program and you partner with a school, you don't have to have a licensed teacher. There's no research that supports that. And that's been an Agency of Human Services AOE conversation for years. And this last year, the Secretary of Education voted in favor of to continue the same program that we have right now, where it's not a licensed teacher. So we know that's coming from we believe that's coming from the governor's office. That makes no sense at all. It flies in the face of the research. Eric McLaughlin from my office was on that commission, as was his team, Mr. Robinson. And it makes no sense, we could easily provide instruction for kids in the public school with licensed teachers. And that's a movement we think it should be something we work toward as a new early kindergarten. And we've been testifying on behalf of that now since I was a superintendent, so about 10 years since the law changed. So we really think that's something that can be fixed. We think a first step in that way would be to provide, if we stay with the current funding system, provide full ADM for pre-K kids. Right now, pre-K kids are counted as basically half a student. So, and it's hurting some of our more poverty-based towns. For example, I also used to St. Albans City. I don't live there, but I remember when the principal and superintendent there started a full day program, very poor community. They have a full day program. The local taxpayers are taking on more of the burden for that because they don't have the full taxing authority they should have. They've got 100 pre-K kids there. They only count as 50 pre-K kids, even though they're there all day, all school year long. So that to me, that's an easy fix. So I'm hoping that that's something that can be looked at as we talk about spending process in the ed fund. Another area that's concerning is the early college program. When that program first came forward, many of us were hopeful that it was gonna target kids that may not otherwise go to college. That has not been the case. It's targeted kids that were gonna go to college anyway. So what's happened is we're providing early college for kids that were already gonna go there, and we're taking that money from the education fund. And the kids that are left behind that don't take advantage of that, there's less resources for them. I'll give you a real clear example. Nearly 1/3 of the seniors at U32 are at early college at Norwich University. So that means that 2/3 of the kids that are left behind, there's less money, there's less resources for them. Schools are making cuts and stuff to provide these payments for colleges for kids that would have gone to college anyway. That's a program that's not working the way it was intended. Another example you all know about is the uncontrolled health costs. We've heard, the governor talk over and over about making cuts to education. And one of the things that we keep focusing on is if you think you need to do that, that's fine. Let's talk about the cost drivers. Let's be honest, have an honest conversation about it. One of the biggest cost drivers is health insurance. Our principals, our school boards, our superintendents have no control over that, our business managers. And that increase every year is eating up a lot of the costs of public education ends up in budgets. Another thing that we think needs some attention is the lack of accountability for many of our private schools. We have private schools that haven't been assessed in years. The assessment that they do on them, we think is not really appropriate either. It's just basically a group like the New England Accreditation Service comes in, does an evaluation on them every 5 years or so, and that can be really good, high quality work. Not a knock on that organization, but they don't have the level of oversight that public schools do. And that would be fine if they were truly independent schools. To me, an independent school means they're not receiving money from public dollars. If you're receiving money from public dollars, you get to go with different rules. To me, that's not really independent. And I think we need to really tighten that up. We have 2 sets of rules instead of 1. We have EQS, Rule 200, and we have 2200 series. And the rules for the private schools are different than the public schools, even though both are taking money from the ed fund. That's an area that I think really needs to be addressed in Vermont. It's a problem. It's sending millions of dollars away to private schools that don't have to always follow the same rules. I'll give you a concrete example from yesterday. Parent called me, they applied, this is not a knock on this school, I have a grandson that might go to this school. Rice High School, they have a parent that applied to the Rice, they had an application fee of $100. Many parents, that's like, oh, I can't spend $100 on application fee. And then if the child's accepted, they have a $250 fee for being accepted that they have to pay. That's not, to me, that's not fair, that's not equitable, and it's potentially hurting our most vulnerable students. We are also concerned, you've probably heard me talk about before about Carson B. Macon. We are concerned that we're allowing money to go to religious private schools that, are discriminating against kids that are from different religions. I don't have any problem with religious schools, but I do have a problem with the public dollar paying for it. And I've read this thing called the Vermont Constitution. Does anybody? And to me, it's really sad that we're not being consistent with our own Constitution. And then lastly, I'll just say for us, VPA, we have this saying called same dollars, same rules. And we think that's what we should try to do everywhere across the state. So that's fair. I tell the Health Education Committee, the other day, and I'm gonna tell the Senate this Friday, it'll be interesting to see how that goes over in Senate Ed. That we think that they need to be the education committee for all kids in the state of Vermont. Not for a select few kids, not for kids that are just in their own districts, but if you're on a committee that has jurisdiction over the whole state, then you should really be focusing on what's best for all the kids in the state and the whole system. So with that, I'll leave that there. Sorry, I didn't have a presentation. I didn't know about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. Would you both be willing to forward your materials?
Yes.
You know, make sure that everybody. gets it.
Absolutely glad.
I'll email you first. though.
Please do that. Don't leave it in your draft after you said it to me.
Yeah.
That's okay. Appreciate that.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions, but I would like to open it up to everybody else first. We've got about 10 minutes before we have to wrap.
I have a quick question, and that is, and I'm sure that the answer is yes, you do have this number somewhere, but I'm wondering what the amount of money, public money is that is going to private schools at this current.
The AOE can give you that money. Last I knew was something like 80.
I was gonna say 50, but
Okay.
yeah,
I might be I'm thinking about public schools out of state too.
yeah.
I'm inflating the number. So yeah, somewhere in the 50s
And growing, right?
and growing.
Million.
Million.
Yes, I don't think very. So somewhere between 50 and 80 million
And
public tax dollars.
Yeah.
Going to
No.
private schools. No, it can be also out of the
It
state.
can be.
Oh, out of school.
Even out of the country,
It can be Phillips Exeter. It can be a ski school in Switzerland.
yes.
We still pay the Vermont state average
Mhm.
out of our public funds.
Yes.
No oversight at all over any of those programs whatsoever.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and it's unconscionable that we do that. It's interesting when I go to state meetings and I attend a lot, with other executive state directors and talk to people. And we talk about some of the things that go on in Vermont, they're like, what? We thought Vermont was all about public education. And we're like, well, it is in some areas, but not like you would think.
A similar experience with national education advocates, that they're pretty
Yeah.
shocked to know what's going on in Vermont.
We have Jennifer Berkshire, people know who Jennifer Berkshire is. She does the, what's her podcast, Have You Heard?
Yeah.
She's the leader of the Have You Heard podcast, and she's written several books, including The Wolf at the Schoolhouse Doors and those types of books. She's meeting with the VPA team on Monday, and we're looking to have her come to Vermont, and do a podcast. We've had her come a couple times, but actually do a podcast on that national program, it's millions of views. And she's really concerned about the voucher movement, things like that. And Vermont's an example of a place that allows lots of things to happen like that, that if you talk to other people in the country, you're like, there's no way, only Florida does that, Vermont doesn't do that.
Well, Vermont's the original voucher.
We got the original voucher thing.
Yeah.
And then if I could just piggyback, I think as legislators hear the governor's proposal tomorrow, and there's any conversations about district consolidation, recognizing that there's great potential for massive expansion of private school vouchers.
That's a big fear.
And that could easily kind of slip under the radar, and it's
It will not slip under the radar. Yeah.
You folks won't let it.
No,
Well, that's good. The school choice in of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But if it's school choice that only benefits people that are wealthy enough or have the resources to take advantage of it, then it's segregation. And we don't wanna have that happen again. We fought for the last 60, 70 years to try to get away from segregation.
I mean, it primarily benefits people with more resources.
I mean,
No question.
it's tax subsidy to wealthy people to
Yes,
send
it
their
is.
children to private school.
That's right.
Like, that is a problem, and meanwhile, lower income and middle income families are paying more in education taxes, and their kids have access to less, like, that's not what we want in an equitable school system.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Cool. Representative McCann, anything on your mind?
No, I listen to these guys all the time.
It's more like he tells us what we should do.
Anything you'd like to add? That you wanna make sure is heard by progressive voters and legislators?
No, I think you heard it, and I think that those are big numbers, $50 to $80 million of public money going to private schools. And I don't think people understand it. I don't think regular taxpayers who are just working to take care of their kids and pay their tax bills and pay their bills in general really understand that amount of money going somewhere other than public schools.
I'm sure you're right.
It's a drum we need to keep beating.
Yeah. That seems like it would be a very popular thing to change. Dr. Tomlinson, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. I'm curious if there's any configuration of a foundation formula that you could imagine working. And also not needing to, making us more prone to the voucher vacation.
Want me to go first? You gotta put me at your next event.
Go for it.
Yeah.
So obviously, there's a lot of different foundation formulas across the country. It's talked about principle from a lot for the other day. Who's in Vermont, had been in Alaska. And I think the key is that it has to be, if it's done, you have to really make sure that what is usually called the base amount or base education amount is a number that really we all believe is substantial to provide education for the average, whoever that is, whole kid. And then on top of that, weights for kids who are more vulnerable. And on top of that, some type of cost of living index increase every year that is provided in statute and is actually funded. Alaska put one in theirs. I don't know if it was a NEEP or what it was. They had some index in theirs, and then they went 9 years in a row without funding. So what happened was the oil-rich towns that could go above that, went above it, kept spending money, and the poorer towns, kept lowering down. And so you create those wide disparities. So you have to be careful of that. I think you have to be really careful having a mechanism, if schools could spend above, how that would line up with the Brigham decision and be appropriate in light of that constitutional decision.
Steph, you want to go?
There's a couple points I think I would make. So yeah, to that point, so I used to work in the Michigan legislature and the foundation system. And I think, the biggest problem is this ability to raise locally anymore above the foundation, because it does have this effect of becoming a ceiling report. So if you eliminated the ability to raise locally, okay, that's possible. We had that before, between Act 60 and 68, and part of the challenge there was the unpredictability of which town would be in there and in a given year. So really, the towns that were in that program, they had no idea what their rates were going to be from year to year. Now, you could set the foundation amount high enough such that there weren't that many towns that would be interested in that, but that would cost a lot of money, right? So if you set the foundation amount like at about the midpoint of where we are now, that means bringing up a whole lot of towns, spending a lot more money. The only way to not spend more money is to force the other towns below to back down the middle, right? So either way, you're sort of doing that. If you set it high, then that's a whole lot more money, right? But then that minimizes the towns that would be likely to raise more on their own. So I think it's pretty tough to do in a way that doesn't create a lot of confusion and a lot more complication than what we have now. I will also say that in Michigan, I think one of the slides I didn't show, we always look at the state budget and acknowledge that public education was a third of the state budget. You take out the federal spending, it's like a half of our state dollars, right? It's the biggest thing that we do. And so what used to happen in Michigan, because we had this foundation formula, is like, oh, we just shave $100 off the foundation. Multiply that by 80,000 kids, that's big money. That's a lot of money. So it's, and the further removed you get from the decision-making authority of the community, the easier it is to make the argument to just shave it off or not fund the increase or do anything like that. I'd also point out that I think there's a desire to let's get a foundation number, then let's inflate it year over year, and then we never have to worry about how much we spend on education spending again. And I think that's just unrealistic. In the last 5 years, our teachers have had to learn how to teach online with a month's notice, right? Like the number of changes that have affected our schools that we couldn't have predicted. So it's always going to be an ongoing conversation over how much to spend. There is no put it on a path and it will be fine. Part of what we were looking at in one of our reports this year was we did that with the minimum wage. We have this automatic inflation process, and we went from having the highest minimum wage in the region, not counting New Hampshire, to the lowest, because everybody else moved faster than we did. So, I think there's no way you can stop regularly evaluating how much you're spending, but the question isn't to evaluate how much you're spending, the question is to evaluate how the kids are doing, right?
And
I could keep going.
yeah, I think as with anything, the details matter significantly. And I think the problem that you're trying to solve is really important. I'm not sure if the rush to a foundation formula, if that's in service of addressing legitimate frustration from middle and working class Vermonters about their property taxes, that's not a reason to go to the foundation formula. That's a reason to change how we raise the money to support our education. If there's arguments to be made for why a foundation formula is materially better for youth and students and educators, that's a different conversation. And I feel like those two are being conflated right now, and it's hard to understand the actual substantive impact of foundation formula construct on kids and educators and schools and the education that is provided at a moment when there's so much frustration, understandably so, by middle class and working class folks about how we fund our schools. So that's why we're focused on the front end. Let's solve that frustration first so we can have a clear-headed conversation that doesn't materially harm our public education system. And I also want to just lift up the point that Steph made about, the further removed you are from decisions that are actually happening inside schools and classrooms, students, the easier it is to just shave off a little bit here and there. And
Sorry to
then,
bother you, but we're in the room here after it.
Oh, we're not there yet. Thanks.
and so I think I would just say proceed with caution.
Yeah, can I add one more thing? I also worry about the democratic aspect of this, the democracy aspect of this. Like, I know, we hear a lot about the, how many people show up to town meeting day or vote, but I don't, I still think it's important. I think it's still think it matters in terms of community engagement, and I think it should be to get people more involved, not just say, well, they're not that involved, so they need to be involved in this meeting.
And just, I do want to acknowledge there are communities like Berry and Slate Valley where they really struggled to pass budgets this past year. And those, we hear from our members, we hear from the students that they work with every day, like they don't have the resources they need to support their students. And so I also want to acknowledge that we do need to do things to materially positively impact communities that need the resources and aren't in a place where those resources are able to be delivered in a budget process that currently exists.
But a foundation system is a very blunt instrument to address that need.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're gonna have to wrap there. I feel like I have at least 15 or 20 more questions myself. But I would just keep going, so I hope we can continue this conversation. I think a lot of people want to hear the information and the perspectives that you're sharing, so I hope we can think about ways to share that with the broader public as much as possible this year, because we're about to hear, I think, a very different perspective. And we need to be prepared.
Also need my cell phone and stuff too, so you guys can certainly share that. I don't have any cards with me. I made up a bunch and gave nothing to
Appreciate it. Yeah, we'll make sure that it gets around. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We're all gonna run out to